1. Good evening. I call to order this meeting of the Finance, Organization, and Personnel Committee of the Keene City Council. We are the committee that deals with the business functions of the city. This meeting is being recorded for later broadcast on Cheshire TV, Channel 8. Anyone wishing to view a copy of the agenda and supporting materials will find it on the city website. The public and other city councilors will be recognized to ask questions, make comments on the agenda item under discussion. After being recognized, all remarks are to be made through the chair. Anyone who wishes to address the committee must first go to one of the microphones, have a seat, identify yourself, name and address. Limit your remarks to 3 minutes or less. Please do not be repetitious. Once the motion has been made and seconded, only the committee and public may speak. Councilors will have an opportunity at the next council meeting. Written comments from the public will be accepted at the clerk's office until Tuesday, 1 p.m. There's one item on the agenda that differs a little from the normal operations, and that's the final one, item 9, regarding the capital improvements program. That item has already had a public hearing, and thus the public may not speak any further on it. It's just for the committee to make its recommendation. So all that being said, our first item on the agenda, we have a memorandum from the Parks, Recreation, and Cemeteries Director. Good evening, Mr. Bohannon. Come on down.
Andy Bohannon, Parks and Recreation Director. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Before you tonight is the American Legion, Gordon Bizzle Post number 4. We use there's two fields located behind their property that were in agreement through LWCF funds with the city for an extended period of time. That agreement ended just a few years ago, and since then we've entered into a one-year agreement with them each year henceafter, and that's for $5,000. That agreement is, that payment is shared with the Greater Keene Men's Softball League and the Greater Keene Women's Softball League. Total is about 75 teams ebb and flow. They're in the process of registering now, so I'm not sure if they have about 70 or 75 this year. But those, we split those fees with those leagues and pay the fee for them. So tonight I'm looking for approval for the city manager to extend that contract for another year.
Okay, questions from the committee? Public comments, questions? Hearing none, Council Clark.
I move that the Finance, Organization, and Personnel Committee recommend that the city manager be authorized to renew and the agreement with the American Legion Post number 4 and the city of Keene for a 1-year control and use agreement of the softball fields located at 797 Court Street.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Anything from the public? Committee? All in favor? 5-0.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda. Actually, I think it might make sense to flip item 2 and 3. We have a communication from Tom Cook in support of the franchise agreement. So it would make sense to hear from him before we actually discuss the franchise agreement.
Tom Cook, 10 Highland Avenue, Keene, New Hampshire. Thank you, gentlemen. I'm here as president of the board of Cheshire TV. You folks are probably aware that the agreement between the city of Keene and the Time Warner at the present time, the franchise agreement, the potential came up to extend our existing agreement, and in entering into negotiations with that, we had, as Cheshire TV, had some interest in different options that might be available to us relative to service as well. And so ultimately, I think you have our support letter before you. Ultimately, we just wanted to let you and the rest of the city council know that we not only supremely appreciated John and Rebecca's representation of us and including us in the decisions, but all things told, we felt that the agreement that has been at least presented thus far, and I think the city and Time Warner are both happy with it. I think we're in full support of it.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Cook?
Yeah, Mr. Cook, I was wondering, did Cheshire TV do any sort of survey asking the ratepayers whether or not they wanted to have a second TV channel?
Asking our subscribers, you mean?
Yeah.
Not to my knowledge. I can certainly defer to Director of Operations Lee Perkins, but what we had, throughout our history, the greatest feedback we get is that the people appreciate the opportunity to see not only community events, but in particular, these kinds of meetings that we're recording right now, and the city council meeting. We've had such an influx of participants who have created their own shows that we started reaching a couple of years ago even. We started reaching, for want of a better term, a saturation point, where we were unable to offer rebroadcasts of the city council meetings and all of the subcommittee meetings, to the extent that our subscribers felt they had a significant opportunity to make sure they could catch up on them. And so that's, as we were looking at that and taking a look at the review of the contract that we had existing and knowing that it was coming up, we were aware that the option for a second channel, which is pretty standard whenever you create anything with for a community access program, the opportunity for a second channel was approaching, and so we thought now is the time to act on that. And so our intention is to, and whichever channels end up being which, one will be a strictly community access, the Cinemaniacs, Lucas Show, that kind of thing, and then the other will be exclusively government and education. And so while I don't believe we have, it's difficult to poll our viewers because there's not any real way, it's not like a Nielsen situation where we can actively tell, while we know Time Warner has this opportunity, I don't know how complex it is, we can't really tell who's watching what. And so our actions are really kind of based on viewer feedback, people we talk to on the streets. I don't know, Councilor Clark, if that answers your question, but based on what we've heard from our viewers, the implementation of the second channel, I think, will fulfill a lot of their desires, particularly toward government and education viewing.
I'd like to say that, I really do believe that, the Cheshire TV offers superior program.
Thank you.
Much better than what Time Warner offers us.
Okay, thank you.
But I just wanted to, ask, whether or not the ratepayers are aware that, that they're going to be paying for this extra channel, and they're going to be paying an extra percentage.
Correct.
For this. So I was just kind of wondering whether or not, we're just coming forward with doing this because all of the technical people and all of the people at the city think it's a great idea, but I'm just wondering whether or not people are actually watching the program and know that they're going to be charged extra for this, and if they've had any input into this process at all.
I see. I may have misunderstood your original question. And if people who are concerned about that, and they should be, understandably, because you're right that our viewers and a percentage of the revenue that is gained from the city, a good percentage of it, not all of it, that comes to Cheshire TV to help pay for those operations, and that's paid through fees to the subscribers. As we've entered into these negotiations and had these discussions, for the past, ever since our iteration, I think that information has been available. The contract as it stands right now, it will take us up to essentially an equivalent of the average cable access cost throughout the nation. We've been significantly lower than most cable access fees throughout the nation. And so that will certainly be one of our attempts. We will need to come before you folks and the city council to request any increases in cable access fees. And that will obviously be an opportunity for the public and the subscribers to voice their opinion. But we're not trying to hide that in any way. It'll be certainly very much public information. But in as much as we can't gauge their interest in our channels, the opposite, I think, of that is true, that it's difficult for us to get that word out. We will certainly be endeavoring to do that because we will be asking, as you say, for an additional few pennies, a quarter a month on a basic rate. I'm not sure exactly what those figures are, so don't quote me on that, please. But we will do our best to let them know this is what you're going to pay, because it will be extra. But hopefully also, this is the extra benefit you're going to get. You're going to get a second channel. You're going to get a lot higher quality programming and hopefully more availability of programming as we free up bandwidth. Does that answer your question?
Well, I thank you for your answer, and I thank you for the quality of the program that you offer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You started hitting on what I was going to ask. Excuse me. The franchise fee, is that two-part? Is that on the basic bill, or is it on your whole bill? And about approximately how much would it cost for the basic person?
I haven't put,
One second.
yes, I'm sorry.
Those questions probably should be on the other item, which is going to
Okay.
be
Oh, okay,
the IMS director. I just wanted to get this letter in on
Sure.
record.
I understand.
Straight up comments there, and so hold your questions. Anything regarding the letter as such? So, accept this information.
Yep, we would, Finance Committee recommends that we accept this as informational.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Anything from the public? Councilors present or committee? All in favor? 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, Mr. Coe. Okay, now back to more of the main event on the item. Item number 2, so-called, brought to us by our IMS director, Assistant City Manager.
Thank you, Rebecca Landry, IMS Director, Assistant City Manager. As you may recall, back in August, we came before the Planning Licenses and Development Committee to talk about the conversion from analog to digital and the Time Warner services, not just Cheshire TV. At that time, it became, we talked also about the request that Cheshire TV has made or was interested in making for the second egg channel. And at that time, the Planning Licenses and Development Committee instructed the city manager to continue discussions with Time Warner because an amendment would be necessary to the franchise agreement in order to make that happen. Right now, the franchise agreement allows for a single PEG access channel. A certain threshold of non-regenerated programming would be necessary to activate a second channel according to the current terms of the franchise agreement. Because that threshold hasn't been reached, it was the amendment is necessary to the agreement in order to proceed with that second channel. And so we were able to talk to Time Warner about that. In October, Time Warner did start the process of preparing a draft amendment to the franchise agreement. There are other conditions in there. We do have a copy of the draft agreement. It certainly isn't finalized. We're here before you tonight to request authorization for the city manager to negotiate and execute that amendment. And I'm happy to answer questions you might have about the process or about the amendment itself.
Councilor Robertson, go forward with your question.
The two part, but I'll change the second part. How is the franchise fees based? Is it based on the basic bill or individual's total bill?
Well, it's not. It does not include broadband internet services or any internet services, for example. That's excluded from what can be charged the franchise fee. So it's only on the video, the cable video services.
And the second part is on page 3 of the, under section 3.6.
The amendment?
Yes, and the capital cost of, the cost of capital equipment in the amount of $6,574 to activate the second channel will be itemized as an excess fee on the customer's bill, not to exceed. So that would come out to $1,300 a year. So that $1,300 a year would be spread out over all Time Warner's subscribers.
Correct. We didn't get into a specific formula here, but as discussed when this was brought to us, they said it would be pennies, probably less than 2 cents per bill. I don't have a final number. I can't give you on the record what the actual number of cents will be, but it will be pennies for no more than 5 years.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, as part of this agreement, though, I understand is to extend their current agreement for 5 years. Where'd that come from?
That was, Time Warner decided that in order to add the second channel before the threshold was reached, they thought it would be reasonable to request an extension of 5 years.
Why is that?
Well, I guess that's, that they wanted to extend the agreement. It would have normally have expired in 2018, so they're basically getting another 5 years in exchange for giving up the second channel early.
And what is it that is required really of them to put the second channel on?
Well, there's some equipment required, and I think I would actually defer to Lee Perkins specifically in terms of what actual actions will need to be taken to add the second channel. But there is equipment and there is some programming on their end that needs to take place. and it uses some of their bandwidth as well.
Was there any discussion in our negotiation, I assume that we've done negotiations with them, to ask them, well, maybe can't you do this a second channel without asking for a 5-year extension to your current contract? Because, you know, the current contract, as we talked about, you know, some time ago, may not be something that is in the best interest of the ratepayers to go forward with, even when it, you know, when it expires in its current form, rather than, you know, extend it for 5 years.
So
been discussed with them what?
I think you asked two questions, and I'll try to answer them both. The first one is, why did they want another 5 years? And I think that they wanted something in exchange for adding the second channel. And I think that, you know, I understand that. I think that makes sense that they would want something in exchange. If we said, please give us the second channel, and that's it, they could very easily say, no, we have an agreement in place, we don't have to do that. And so this is just part of the negotiating process. Now, are we giving up something by extending the opportunity to renegotiate the agreement another 5 years versus doing it in 2018? Well, that would, we talked about this, and there's what is the possibility that someone else would come in and want to have that franchise agreement instead of Time Warner? And what are we able to get from Time Warner that we're not getting now if we renegotiate in 2018 versus 2023? So those questions came up and those discussions took place, and we feel that this is a reasonable place to be.
Can I ask you? You recall, I was a member of the former Cable TV Commission before it was for 5 years, and the last year I was the vice chair. And do you recall, you were at one of the meetings where we talked to Time Warner about some of the things that were required in their current franchise agreement. One of them being that they had to report to us any complaints from ratepayers, and we asked them to give us a list of complaints. They reported back that they had no complaints, and I remember asking them why, and they said that because they weren't required to write them down. There are many other things that we've asked of Time Warner. You spoke briefly about last October when we went from digital, the agreement there, and they were unwilling to give elderly people a waiver of some sort, you know, to provide with them the ability for them to have access to their basic cable service. I'm just wondering, what is it that you know, I read in the wording in this proposal here about the positive relationship that we have with Time Warner. I'm kind of wondering, you know, I can't think of any positive relationship that we have with Time Warner. They seem to be sticking exactly to their franchise agreement. They're not willing to give us anything. They're not willing to give the ratepayers anything unless it's, you know, required by law. And then even if it is required by law, and I can mention 2 instances where it has to be pushing and shoving before they'll even acquiesce to that. So I'm kind of wondering why we are so easy to just give them this extra 5 years when I don't believe that they agree with anything that we want to do, and I don't think they deserve it.
Just as a thought, Councilor Park, could you maybe create a memo to the city manager, as, because what we're talking about is to empower negotiations. So if you have some issues, share it with him and let him negotiate these things. And, you know, you're right. And
Well, okay,
perhaps he'll be able to
then I
utilize
guess,
that.
you know, what we're talking about here is their ability to negotiate and, what's the second one?
Execute.
Execute. I would strike execute.
Well, perhaps when we get to the motion, take it. Yes, ma'am.
I'd just like to address a few points. Again, I think there were a number of questions asked, so I'm going to try to answer the ones that I took note of. First of all, you did ask 5 years. That sounds like a lot to ask, right? And that was one of our instant reactions as well. We asked if they would be interested in talking about a second channel. They say, sure, but we want to have a 5-year extension. And we had the same reaction. Well, that's a lot to ask because we had a cap in the existing franchise agreement for a 3.25% franchise fee, and we didn't want to leave that cap in place for an extra 5 years. It sort of closed the door on the ability to raise that franchise fee without another negotiation of another amendment. And they were willing to actually provide an opportunity to get that franchise fee up to 5% within 2 years, rather than waiting until even 2018 to do that. So that was one of the areas of the franchise agreement that they were willing to also sort of help us with in exchange for going for the 5-year extension. So they didn't just try to sort of bully their way into a 5-year extension. They were willing to talk about some of the other points of concern that we would have had extending for 5 years. They addressed those concerns. We did talk in the PLD committee process and in an informational memo that went out about that concern of the elderly installation fee that they were having to charge, and what Time Warner's response was that they couldn't just waive the fee across the board, but if someone had